folks, how we all doing? How we all doing? And this is so bizarre because I'm sat in my living room here in a very balmy, clammy Manchester, whilst all of you hopefully are sitting in beautiful air-conditioned office spaces or on your comfy working from home spot at home. So I'm very excited to welcome you all here. This is really, really exciting. And what's most exciting about it is that this is our first ever virtual Pride showcase. And the theme for today is champion inclusivity in the workplace. My name is Dean McCullough, by the way, and I know a fair bit about being gay. I've been gay my whole life. I know, what a shock. I was born gay. I'm very proud to be gay, but it's not always been that way for me. I grew up in Belfast and I moved to London when I was 17. And upon reflection now, I'm going to be 29 in a couple of weeks, but upon reflection now, I can see how there were so many opportunities in my growing up in Belfast and my work through various different workplaces. I was a telesalesman for patio doors and windows and stuff, and I got treated so badly in that workplace. And then, you know, going into the more corporate world, I can now recognize, now working in the LGBT sector, how important inclusivity is in the workplace. But what really fascinates me now is that actually within the LGBT community, there's so much change happening. So what I want to say to you today, the big message that I would like to get across is to relax and not worry. There's going to be loads of information that our brilliant speakers are going to share with you today. And what I would like you to do is just to ask questions, because this is all about education. The previous events that Speakers Corner have done have all been about education. And if you've never found yourself in a safe space to ask questions about anything to do with the LGBT plus community, now is the time to do that. As long as you're respectful, it's great. And as long as you're, you know, not being offensive, not that I think that you will, but don't be afraid to ask those questions that you might think are stupid. They're not, and they'll be welcome with open arms today, because I've got three amazing people to introduce you to. Now, a recent study by Harvard Business Review study showed that 68% of LGBT plus employees are still not out. That is a staggering figure. And I guess it's all to do with their environments and how they feel. So I want to, first of all, introduce you to somebody really, really exciting who's going to talk about building inclusive environments so that we can perhaps get that figure down a little bit in a couple of years. She's a member of Stonewall's Development Council and was the first female CEO of Lloyd. She played a key role in highlighting the importance of diversity and inclusion, and continues to work in driving the inclusive agenda for women and the LGBT community. Inga will share what it means to lead cultural change and how to build inclusive environments at work. Dame Inga Beale, welcome.
Well, thank you, Dean. And I want to start with a question for everyone. I want to say or ask, how many times have you felt you didn't belong somewhere? How often are you or were you in a situation where you feel like or felt like the excluded one, the different one, the odd one out? Well, for me, that actually started quite early in life. I grew up in Newbury, small market town, 60 miles west of London, actually in a happy family. But I was the middle child, so already maybe I had some problems. But the important thing for me at that time was that my brother and sister were born with white blonde hair. I was born with dark brown hair. Now, you'd say, well, why does that matter? Well, it mattered to me because my brother and sister told me I was adopted because I looked different to them. And as I said, this was from a very early age, 5, 6, 7 years old. And my brother and sister became great friends and they played together all the time. And I felt like the odd one out. Despite everything my parents said to me about I wasn't adopted and they gave me all the love they could, I still felt like the odd one out. And that feeling of not being included in the gang, that very early feeling probably helped me gain the independent streak that's actually been an important part of how my life has been shaped over the years. Because I used to play on my own, I used to be very independent, go on long cycle rides on my own, even from when I was a little girl. But we know, of course, that Not feeling included, particularly in the workplace, is not a good thing. It's not good for an individual, and it's certainly not good for business. Now, I started working quite a while ago in the City of London in the 80s. 1982 was the first time I got a job, and I wasn't actually focused on my career at all at that stage. I was working in a very male-dominated environment. It was in the insurance sector, and to fit in, became one of the lads. I so didn't want to be different to them. I wanted to be one of them. So in the office environment, I kind of took on male behaviors, and I just wanted to be like the men. I wanted to be accepted. And of course, I wasn't ever really fully accepted like that, but I also had an escape valve. I had sport. And what was more important for me in those early days of working in the city was that I could leave the office each evening and get down to the River Thames, right in the heart of London, and get out on the water with my rowing crew, because we had daily training sessions. And then a few years later, I started playing rugby, quite a high level. I played for Wasp Rugby Club. I played there for 12 years. And I think it was the sports that actually gave me a feeling of belonging, because it was naturally very inclusive, that you were part of the team. So I had a very important support network outside of work, which I think was my savior. It kept me going. Now, I did get to the top of the insurance profession, but insurance very nearly lost me when I was in my late 20s after a sexist incident at my employer. I said I was working in a very male-dominated environment, and I was 27 years old, and I arrived at work one morning to find my workstation wrapped up like a goddamn present in posters of scantily clad women. Well, this was the late 80s, so there were a lot of posters like that around. I was so mad, I walked out of the office. I didn't speak to anyone. I just went home completely disillusioned with the whole industry. I gave up my job and promised myself I'd never work in insurance again. I decided to go traveling around the world, the best decision I ever made. I traveled for about a year in total, and I learned about the power of role models, because being in London at that time in insurance, there were no senior women, no female role models. But after some months of traveling through Asia, I got to Australia, I got to Sydney, and then I needed some money because I hadn't exactly planned this trip. And I got a job at the BBC in Sydney. Now, in this office, the manager was a woman, and I was like, wow, the most senior person in this office is a woman. And she acted completely naturally. She wasn't trying to be a guy. She wasn't trying to be a man. She wasn't trying to be anything that she wasn't. And she had a huge impact on me. And that was the first time I realized the importance of having a role model. And the older I've gotten, the more I've gone through my career, I realize the importance of role models. Now, after my travels, I was back in the London insurance market, and another phase of my life started, because I did actually accept my old job back when my employer heard I was back. But I was this time doing it on my terms. But I had another phase starting because I started to date women. And up until that time, I'd been a heterosexual woman as far as I was concerned. So here I was now having a lesbian chapter. And I made all sorts of sacrifices during that time because I wasn't out. I decided I was working in this very male environment. There was no way I was going to come out about my sexuality. So for many years, I was in the closet. And my partner, who was with me for many, many years, she moved to the US with me. She moved to Germany with me. She moved to France, to Switzerland. And always she was secret in the background. My employer never knew that I was gay. So that was happening for many, many, many years. Now, I did come out eventually in 2007, and there was a whole story behind that because I'd gone through a huge trauma at work. I was the CEO of a company. We'd had a hostile takeover. I was under a lot of pressure for months. And it wasn't actually the pressure. It was after the pressure was over, and one of my exec team came to me and said, Inga, how did you cope? How did you cope on your own through all that time? And I suddenly thought, wow, I've been lying to all these people. They've been feeling sorry for me because they think I'm on my own. I said, enough is enough. What have I done to myself? What have I done to my partner? And I said, from that moment on, the next job interview I go for, I'm going to come out. And I did. In the first 5 minutes of that next job interview, I got the job and I felt wonderful. It released a whole energy in me that I'd never had before. But then a few years on, and I have had various phases to my life. I suppose I start off feeling the odd one out at home. I go through being a heterosexual woman fighting in a man's world in the 80s. I then become this sort of roving feminist traveling the world to becoming a lesbian. And then what happens? After 12 years, my wife at the time chose to leave me for a younger woman. And I found myself in a relationship with a man again. Now, this was in 2013. So then I got a new label, bisexual. And then another type of exclusion happened. The lesbians didn't want me around anymore because I was now with a man. So I know what it's like through various stages of my life to be in the gang, out of the gang. But when I arrived at Lloyd's, I realized that I needed to now really be a brave role model around this stuff. Because I arrived to a very old institution which had very little diversity. And I knew we had to change if we were going to survive into the modern world. So I thought, what am I going to do about this? I started talking about it, employee town halls. I started talking about the lack of women in senior roles. I started looking out at a sea of white faces. I started using words like gay, lesbian, and bisexual. And I tell you, there were, first of all, some giggles, perhaps heads bowed in slight embarrassment, but I didn't stop. And our employees started to feel empowered. They felt empowered. They started networks and groups, employee resource groups. And I remember particularly the launch of our Pride at Lloyd's group, our LGBT network. We launched it one evening. We had some speeches. It was a celebration. And one of the men who was there, an older guy, had been working at Lloyd's for about 30 years. He came up to me and he had a slight tear in his eye. And he said, "Inga, thank you. I never thought I would see this happen in Lloyd's. I never thought I would see this day. This is quite amazing." I thought he was going to tell me he'd come out of the closet for the first time after 30 years at work. But instead, he told me that his son was gay. And for years, he'd not felt able to talk about it openly at work. Perhaps for fear of some nasty banter in the office, criticism, whatever it was, some judgment that people were going to make. I was delighted that he'd now come out about his son. And it shows the power of what you can do through employee resource groups or having an inclusive workplace. They can liberate and empower individuals, and sometimes in ways that we might not have expected. Now, obviously, an organization's culture is a direct reflection of its leadership, and I was able to do all sorts of things. But there's also stuff from an individual perspective that can be done. And every single one of us every day can be a role model in some way. We can influence and make change happen, speak up when we think there's some inappropriate behavior being displayed or something feels wrong. So people can have huge influence. I want to be able to use mine, and I want to be able to continue to be outspoken. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand back to Dean.
Inga, thank you for that. I'm sure everybody watching this will have questions for you. But Inga, I can't let you go without asking you quickly, who's your role model? Who's your role model?
Well, actually, I have a female role model. I don't really know her sexuality, but she's probably heterosexual, but it's Christine Lagarde. Maybe not everyone knows her, but having worked in financial services for nearly 40 years, she was very impactful, particularly for women, because she headed up the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and yet she was very strong and working very much in a man's world, but she was always doing her bit to empower women in business. So she's been very much a role model for me.
Oh, thank you for that, Inga. Appreciate that. As I said before, get those questions in for Inga, and we'll be answering them a little bit later. Now, my next guest has enjoyed having enjoyed a successful career managing boxers. Kellie Maloney has since become an inspirational transgender figure. She appeared as a housemate on Celebrity Big Brother and has also produced an in-depth documentary following her journey to transition called Kellie Maloney No Going Back. And she now has a new documentary on Amazon Prime called From Frank to Kellie. Joining us now is Kellie Maloney. Hello, Kellie. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you.
Take it away.
Yeah, obviously, I was very interested in the Dame's speech, and I was actually opposite to her. I always wanted to be included in the gang. I always wanted to be part of the in crowd. Never wanted to be left out. And from the age of 3, I totally felt different to how my brothers felt, how my friends felt, and I never wanted to feel that. You know, I always wanted to be. I'm the oldest of 3 sons. I'm now the eldest daughter in the family, and I never knew what it was. I went through my life being the eldest son in an Irish Catholic family, working class, is a very hard thing to be open about anything. I never felt that I was gay because I was never attracted to boys. And I was never physically attracted to women, though I loved their company and I felt very comfortable in women's company. And it wasn't until I read an article in the, I think it was around, I was about 12 years old, if I remember right, about April Ashley, who was my role model. And I do agree that we all need role models. And I read this article on April Ashley in the Sunday People and how they destroyed her life and totally dismissed her. And it ran for weeks. And I read, but I could relate to everything in that article. And for the first time in my life, I realized that I was born in the wrong body. But how do I deal with it being the oldest boy in an Irish working class family and a father that really encouraged us in sport? And it was sport that kept me sane. But again, I went into a sport that was an individual sport, boxing. I was never a great team player. I hated being employed in companies at a young age when I went through, so when I first started work. As soon as I was able to, I went to work on my own. And boxing helped me, but I hid my true self. I was lying to my family. I was lying to myself. I was lying to my friends. And when you're lying, it is the hardest thing in the world because you have to be someone you're not. I, for some unknown reason or for some lucky reason, my boxing career took off, and I don't know why to this day that Lennox Lewis, the 1988 Olympic gold medal heavyweight, decided to sign with a little boxing promoter out of Peckham, Frank Maloney. And from that minute, my life totally changed. I started to produce this arrogant little Cockney guy that never really cared about anything other than being in front and being afraid of people finding out how I really felt. You know, people saw this guy in the Union Jack suit who was about round about town all the time, was always surrounded by women and a gang of guys that we partied hard. We worked hard and we partied hard. And, you know, I made comments about society. You know, unfortunately, I made a mistake and I joined Nigel Farage's band of imbeciles. And I stood for the mayor of London in 2004, and I made comments reflecting to the gay community, which I greatly regret. And I had the privilege of standing at another UKIP convention when I came out in 2014. And Farage thought I was going to stand and say I was a member of UKIP, so he could then say UKIP are inclusive. But I stood there and I said, I stand before you today, not as a member of UKIP, but as a member of a community that is struggling to be accepted, that people dismiss. And I also stand here to apologise to the gay community who I made very bad remarks about in 2014. The hall went quiet. Farage went absolutely crazy at me after. But I felt that I'd lifted and I'd made amendments to what I'd done in 2004. I know some people will never forgive me for them comments. They were made. And I've always said this, you can hide from your past, but I can't run from my past. And for 60 years, I was this Cockney rebel, arrogant little guy that walked around London. And it was only when I was able to look in the mirror, face myself, and be truthful to myself and become the real me that my life totally changed. Instead of seeing the world in black and white, I realized it was a very grey area, but I also realized there was so many different colors out there, so many, and I saw the world so different. And I became such a different person because I was no longer lying. I was no longer destroying my family. I was no longer destroying myself because I was being honest and open to the world. And I really believe, and I wanted to have friends and become members of teams. And I joined groups to work and help other trans people. And our community does struggle. We are very misunderstood. We are where the LGBT community was about 15 years ago. At this moment, we are the right-wing press hate mob. Let's attack the trans community. We have the feminist group who don't like us. Yes, I am not a biological woman. I will admit to that, but I'm a medically constructed woman. I have the emotions of a woman. I have the feelings of a woman, and I can never ever stop how I feel. But what I do have now, I have the happiness that I've never had before. My children say that I'm a much better parent than I was in the past. My friends say I'm a much nicer person than I was, and I'm not trying to be someone I wasn't. And I think the minute that you stop lying to yourself, you become a totally different person. You become more accepted in society. You get on with people. I no longer I still live a very quiet life and a very private life, though I was in Celebrity Big Brother and Celebrity Master Chef, and a number of other programs and documentaries have been made about me. And I've just signed a contract to have my life story made into a feature film with a big American production company. But what I am now, I'm a happy person. I'm so contented, and I want to be out there to help others. I want to be able to give something back to society. I don't want people to be afraid to be who they are the way I was. For 60 years, I was afraid to admit who I was. I was afraid to look in the mirror and see the real me. But now I look in the mirror and I do see the real me. I actually smile now when I look in the mirror, something I never done before. I smile in photographs, and sometimes I still look at photos of Frank Maloney and Kellie Maloney, and the difference is amazing. And that's because I am no longer lying to the world. I am no longer lying to my family, because I was destroying my family by lying to them. I was destroying I did destroy my business, and that's why I had to walk away from it in 2013. I have thought about coming back into the boxing business, and I've come back on the fringe, but I don't want to be put in that pressure. I don't want to be put in that world. Um, when I started in boxing, I was always told the world of boxing is like a big pond, and it's got a number of sharks, a lot of sharks, and only the vicious and the violent sharks get to the top. I won't name them because I don't want to get sued, but I had to become a shark, and unfortunately, I did become a shark. And some of the things I've done, I'm not pleased about, but I now try to make up for those things by being the real me, by going around talking to companies, and by trying to help other trans people. And I always say to people, look, labels are just labels. I don't really like a label, though I accept I'm a trans woman, but I tell everyone I'm a woman. But I tell people what I am. I am a member of the human race, and that's what we all are. Labels are just things the government tried to give us to put us in boxes. I don't believe that. We all enter this world the same way, and it's a dead straight road. There's no U-turns. There's no reversing back. There's a few bumps on the road because I've hit a few of them, and I've got over them, thank heavens. But at the end of the day, heterosexual, gay, trans, whatever nationality you are, whatever religion you are, whatever colour you are, guess what? We all go in that wooden box and we're all going to disappear. So to me, the only letter that matters is the letter R, and that is respect for us as human beings. All I ask people to do, you may not understand what I've done. I don't understand why it happened to Frank Maloney, but it did. But I may not like you, you may not like me, but I respect you as a human being. And that's all I ask for, that I am respected as a human being, not just me, the whole LGBT community. And another thing I don't struggle with, because I've learned to understand it. I feel there's a lot of confusion for the heterosexual world to understand the trans community, because we're all together at the LGBT. I come from a movement in the trans community where it should be LGBNT. The reason, or separately, the T should be moved away. The reason I say that is because the T is about our gender, the LGB is about our sexuality. And today, I listened to the Dame saying how she came out and that. I sit here today, I transitioned in 2014. I still don't know my sexuality. And I think I'm going to find it very hard to understand it because there's so many different sexualities coming out every day. And I was speaking to a group of university students not long ago, and we were chatting about the different sexualities. And one of them came up with pan-romantic. And I said, could you explain what pan-romantic is? And they said to me, yes, you love the person. It doesn't matter about their sexuality or their gender. You're interested in romance, companionship, and being with someone. If sex happens, it happens. If it doesn't really matter to you. It's the companionship and the love of that person. And I actually think that suits me. That could probably be me. And the reason I say that is I think I'm scared to have a relationship with someone. I'm scared to have a relationship with a man because obviously for 60 years of my life, I was a man. I've been out with men to dinner. It has never ended in success because they're fine until they realise who I was in a previous life. And you just see their flashing in their head and how it changes. And I want that all to stop because it doesn't matter about the person. It's the person sitting in front of you that counts. It's the way that person responds to you that counts. You know, I've got friends. I'm very lucky. I'm 5'2". I can walk out my front door and no one knows who I was. And I was never recognised or misgendered when I was living as Kellie until, unfortunately, a red top newspaper decided they'd found out through someone who I told, and they tipped off a newspaper and I was being followed. It cost me a fortune in legal fees to keep it quiet. And because I wanted to come out on my own terms, and eventually I did, because I wanted the world to understand it wasn't about my sexuality. It was about my gender. It was about how I felt mentally. I wanted to stop that feeling that I wanted to kill myself. And I did attempt that 3 times. And I ended up in a mental hospital, a psychiatric ward chained to a bed. And, you know, it's not just me that affects my family. And it affects my colleagues and my friends. And that's something I want to see stopped. Why should someone, because they don't fit into society as society should see them, should be afraid to be themselves, and the only escape they can see is suicide? That is not the answer. The answer is that we all help each other, we work together, and we just respect each other. That to me is most important. You don't have to like me, you don't have to love me, but respect me the way I respect you. That is more important to me than anything else, you know. And if we get to that stage in life, I think we will start winning. We are being more accepting in a lot of places, but I still find a lot of companies play lip service. And that is something I don't like, just to tick that box. That's not the right way to go about this. If you want to get the best results from your staff, if you want to be successful, you've got to be inclusive. You've got to accept diversity. You've got to let their people be who they really want to be. If they want to come out of the closet, you've got to let them do that and make them feel as accepting as anyone else in your office or in your place of work. That's very important. You know, I go to a lot of schools, I go to a lot of workplaces, and I was there yesterday talking, I won't say which company, and they're not ticking the boxes. They are really working hard at it. But after a woman came up to me, very similar to the Dame story about the man, my 2 dogs are starting, very similar to the story. And she had tears in her eyes. And I said to her, what's wrong? She went, Kellie, your talk was so inspirational and has helped me a lot. And I said, and I looked at her and I said, why is that? For what reason? She went, my child is changed and I've been so afraid to tell people. But by you standing up there and saying what you said, you've made it so much better for me. And she said, what can I do to help my child? I said, all you can do is be there. And if you accept your child will grow up, be confident and be accepting in there. If you cannot accept your child will live in a box for the rest of their life. And to me, that is so important. We shouldn't be living in boxes. We shouldn't be afraid to walk out of our front door. I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime, but I hope that 5'2", 6'2", if you're a trans person, you walk out your front door, no one blinks an eyelid. They just accept you for who you are.
That was just so heartfelt and honest. I really, really appreciate you sharing your story. Kellie touched on something really, really interesting there that I hear a lot. I've worked in the LGBT sector now for 10 years, and I host a breakfast show now on the world's biggest LGBT radio station. So it's safe to say I've met quite a few LGBT plus people in my time, and I feel like I have lived through various different generations of the LGBT movement as well. And I get frustrated. I get frustrated at the lack of understanding, but I also get frustrated at sometimes the ignorance within the LGBT community as well. But the one thing that really has been consistent throughout all of this for LGBT people is respect. You don't need to understand, like Kellie said. You don't need to, because we don't understand. You know, you've heard from Inga and from Kellie that within LGBT plus people and within our community, we're still figuring things out. The LGBT community is so young in its infancy as an actual community. So if you're sat there now going, gosh, you know, it's a lot to get your head around, and I can't imagine what it would be like to not look in the mirror and see the person that I want to be looking back, or I can't imagine being in the workplace and not feeling like I can sit down and talk to my boss or my employees. Don't stress about that. Don't worry about that, and don't necessarily rack your brains to try and understand that and think, well, because I don't understand that, I'm just going to distance myself from it. It's not about that for LGBT plus people. It's just about respect. And that respect in saying, look, you know, employee or boss or colleague, look, I didn't know that, you know, trans men can get periods. I didn't know that. Can you tell me more about that? Or I didn't realize that bi people weren't just greedy. Can you tell me more about that? Or, oh, I can't quite get my head around this. Can you explain this to me? That's really important. And LGBT plus people you'll almost see them relax, like, oh, thank you for hearing me. Thank you for giving me that time and to share their story. And as we've heard from Kellie and from Inga, there are stories to be heard, and it's really interesting. So I appreciate you staying with us. And if you've got any questions for the folks that we've heard so far, please do send them in, and we'll definitely put them to them after we hear from my final guest. So final speaker today is a criminal barrister and author of A Dutiful Boy, Mohsin Zaidi. Now, he's an adamant advocate for LGBT rights, ethnic minority representation, and social mobility. But Mohsin is a trailblazer in the world today, and you're going to be really taken aback and probably feel a wee bit emotional with the story that he's about to tell you about allyship. Welcome, Mohsin. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. What an introduction. I hope I live up to it. So happy Pride, everybody. And as has been touched upon, I like to, the things I care about are class and faith and race and intersectionality. But I hope you'll forgive me because it's Pride Month, I'm going to talk about an experience that's to do with my sexuality, but I'm not going to give you an overview. Instead, I'm going to kind of go in on just one particular story, and that is the story of probably the most embarrassing moment of my life. So, as was mentioned, I am a lawyer, and the Supreme Court sits at the top of the British judicial hierarchy. So that's the top court in the land. And in fact, it's probably one of the top courts in the world because of the Commonwealth, because it's the top court for some countries around the world as well. And the Supreme Court has 12 judges in it. And every year there's a competition to find 12 new young lawyers to be assigned to each of these judges to help them with all of the legal work. And one year, a few years ago, I was successful and I was totally chuffed to bits. And I remember my first day, I walked into Lord Nicholas Wilson's office and he looked onto Parliament Square. So from his office, you could see Big Ben, you could see the Houses of Parliament, you could see the Treasury, and you could see Westminster Cathedral. And I was so nervous because I thought to myself, I'm working with the person who's at the top of their game in my profession. So the only equivalent I can give you is, if you're a singer, it would be like interning with Beyonce. Like, this is how great it was. And he said to me, Mohsin, it's a real pleasure to meet you. And the first thing I'd like your help with is a speech that I'm going to be giving in Northern Ireland on marriage. And at the time, same-sex marriage was unlawful in Northern Ireland. And when he said that to me, I froze, because I thought, oh my God, this really posh, very traditional, old, and I'm going to be honest, white man is telling me that he wants to do a speech on marriage and my job is to help him, but I don't want to. So he starts talking. And as he's telling me what he intends to put in his speech, I realize that quite apart from wanting to talk about how traditional marriage is, Lord Wilson wants to do the opposite. What he wants to do is talk about how marriage is a man-made concept. And so as a man-made concept or a person-made concept, it's elastic. So we can do with it what we like. Essentially, his point was, we should let same-sex couples get married because we invented marriage. And for me, that was lesson number one. I had looked at him and made a judgment. I'd looked at the color of his skin. I'd listened to the sound of his voice. I'd looked at his surroundings, and I thought about what he was going to say to me. There were misconceptions. And the thing about it was that this is what people did to me, and I hated it when people did to me. And here I was doing it to somebody else. And I learned a lesson in that. But I told you that this was a story about the most embarrassing moment of my life, and so I should come on to it. Now, we got working on the speech, and during the work, I realized that Lord Wilson didn't really like technology. So he would have his secretary print out his emails, and he would write a reply, and then she would send it off for him. And I remember saying to him, I was like, look, you're a Supreme Court judge, like, you need to join the 21st century. And he complained about the technology. And so I had recently bought an iPad and I lent it to him. And I said, look, these are really easy to use. I gave it to him on a Friday and I said, just take it for a couple of weeks. And on the Monday, so 2 days later, he came back to me and he said, here's your iPad, I bought my own. And I was really surprised, but, thought great. And so then we spent a lot of time working on this speech, and the speech was a fantastic success. He flew over to Northern Ireland. The speech made headlines because it was a judge telling all of these lawyers in a part of Northern Ireland that didn't have same-sex marriage that they should have same-sex marriage. And you had the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and other newspapers talking about the speech. And it was incredible. And I was so excited for him to get back. So he flew back and I went into his office and I said to him, Lord Wilson, that was so cool. I'm so pleased I got to work on it. And he thanked me. And I said, well, actually, you don't have to thank me, because not only was it a professional privilege, but also a personal one, because I'm gay. And I was a bit scared about telling him, but I knew that I had to be honest with him at that point. And I didn't want to do it beforehand because I worried it would pollute our relationship somehow. And his response was to say, Mohsin, I hope you don't mind my saying, but I already know. And I kind of paused and thought, okay. And he said, oh, not because I could tell, although it'd be fine if I could tell, but because, do you remember when you lent me your iPad? And I kind of thought about it and thought, yeah, I do. And he said, well, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but your iPad syncs with your iPhone. And over that weekend, you were getting some rather colorful text messages from a young man named Alejandro. This was the single most embarrassing moment of my life. I was totally lost for words. I was more than lost for words. I wanted the ground to swallow me up. And I excused myself. And he tried to stop me, but I just rushed out of the room as quickly as I could. And I was too afraid to go to my desk because my colleagues were going to be there. And so I sat in this toilet cubicle thinking about my now ruined career. I had made a fool of myself in front of one of the top judges in the country, if not the world. I worried about what a laughingstock I was going to be amongst the legal profession. And I sat rocking side to side in that cubicle for a good 10 minutes. And I thought, who can I call? I can't call my parents because I can't tell them about Alejandro. I can't call my friends because they will laugh. And I can't call my legal colleagues because they'll be mortified the same way I am. In fact, the only person I thought about calling was Alejandro, but for reasons that I won't go into today, I didn't call him either. Coming out is petrifying. It's a really scary thing to have to do, particularly when you're younger. And I had always been in control of when I did it. And now I'd lost that control. And not only had I lost that control, but I'd lost that control in a situation where it really mattered, with somebody who I really respected. And I was so, so embarrassed. And I couldn't see a way forward. But I knew that I had to get up and go back into that office. And so that's what I did after 10 minutes in that toilet cubicle. And I went in and started to apologize. And he said, I don't want you to apologize. Come and sit down. And I sat down. And before I could say anything, he said, I want to tell you 3 things. Number 1, Mohsin, you have nothing to be embarrassed about. I want to know more about Alejandro. Please leave out all of the details because I have enough context from those text messages that I can fill in the blanks, but please tell me more. Number 2, he told me that he loved working with me. And number 3, he thought that I was an excellent lawyer and the other judges in the court agreed that I was an asset to the court. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life. And it's also the most powerful example of allyship I could ever give you. In this humiliation, in this deep humiliation that I felt acceptance. I felt like it was nothing short of transformative. Because if I could be myself in front of one of the top judges in the country, then there's a lesson in that for me. And I think it's a lesson that applies more broadly. If I could be myself with this amazing judge, then I could be myself at the law firm that I was at. I could be myself at the chambers, the barristers' chambers I was going to. I could be myself with my clients and in front of other judges lower down in the chain when I was in court. Because if one of the top judges in the world can see my naughty messages and still think that I belong, then so can everyone else. Now, before I end, I should reiterate, don't get me wrong. I am not suggesting for a moment that you share your naughty messages with your boss because that will not go well and that is entirely inappropriate. But this story I've shared with you because for me, this is allyship. It came from a moment that I lost control. It came from, as I've said before, the most embarrassing moment of my life. And from it, I realized that I didn't need to be in control of coming out anymore. I was so far out of the closet that it didn't matter. That it meant, ultimately, that I could just be me. Thanks for listening to me speak today.
Wow, Mohsin, that was revelationary. I was not expecting it to go there. Folks, we're going to welcome all of our speakers back now and have a Q&A for the next 14 minutes. Please do send any questions in now that you can absorb the information and the stories that these folks have shared with us this afternoon. Feel free to put them in the chat and I'll make sure that our speakers are nice and quick with their responses so that we can get through as many as possible. The first question is for Inga, and this comes from Laura. Laura says, we're about to launch, this is a really interesting question, we're about to launch an LGBTQ+ group at work. What advice would you give to make this launch and group a success across the organization?
I've been involved in a few launches, actually, market and industry launches, as well as within an organization. And sometimes people get stressed at the beginning that you've got to have a wonderful detailed plan and you've got to set out this wonderful vision and mission statement and have objectives. I say, don't stress about that. Just get on and start trying things, because it also depends how mature your organization is and whether this is going to go down well or not. But one thing for sure, try and get allies in from the beginning. The most powerful thing we had going at Lloyd's when we launched the Pride at Lloyd's network was that right from day one, we had allies there. So they were, if anyone was muttering by the coffee machine or something about why is this group going on, there was somebody who was an ally defending it and standing up. And that meant that we had many, many more LGBT employees come out on day one almost, because they knew that they were protected, supported, defended by loads of other people in the organization. So that's a great little tip just to start off. Try and go for those allies right from the beginning.
Thank you for that, Inga. Kellie, this one's for you. Did you find anyone surprised you when you came out, in a good way or a bad way, with their reaction to you?
I found it in both ways, to be honest. But I mean, my daughters were so supportive, and it was through them that I got through most of my struggles. But some people that I worked with all my life, a lot of them distanced themselves, and I even had one say to me, I don't know how, well, he didn't even send it himself, he sent it through a third party. The message was, tell Frank, or tell that freak that I can't speak no more or deal with them because I'm a real man. And my response was, can you tell me what a real man is? And this is a person who works in the boxing world, and they're quite a high profile promoter at the moment.
Oh gosh, we hear those stories quite a lot in coming out stories. There's always a moment, isn't there, when you tell somebody, and actually quite often it's a nicer moment, but there are still some really hairy moments. Thank you for that. Mohsin, this one's for you. How does intersectionality play into leadership in the workplace?
Well, I think that too often we are dividing ourselves into subgroups. And so I think I don't think that any person is just one thing. So there's a famous quote by one of my favorite writers. She says that no person is a single issue cause because we do not lead single issue lives. And I think that so often we say, okay, the LGBT group is over here, and then the ethnic minority group is over here. And for me, leadership vis-a-vis intersectionality is about finding a way that people don't need to feel so siphoned off anymore, so that they can, as individuals, bring all of themselves to work, but then also as separate teams or separate diversity teams, find a way of harnessing the power and potential of each network so that you are kind of allies to each other. So instead of just having allies for the LGBT network, make the networks now allies for each other as well.
Thank you for that. This is a question for you, Inga, that says, for leaders who foster a culture of don't ask, don't tell, how do we show them that sharing our stories can add value to the workplace and oftentimes the bottom line?
Well, in terms of the bottom line, there's been so much research on why you need diverse teams, but also B, people to be out from the LGBT community, because the productivity reduces if people aren't fully out at work, and also when they're not fully engaged. And so if you don't have an inclusive environment, your employees are less engaged, so your productivity goes down. I rarely talk about those business facts anymore because, as far as I'm concerned, there's been so much research done on them by the big consulting firms. They speak for themselves. However, you've got to get people and leaders, and particularly if there's one CEO who doesn't get it, to a place where they're emotionally attached to some story. Now, I had somebody at work, he was actually my CFO, thought all this, it was just, he poo-pooed everything I was talking about diversity and inclusion, and said to one of his colleagues who reported it to me, oh, does this mean I've got to learn to crochet now? That sort of statement that really riles me. Anyway, I didn't get angry about this. I actually persevered. And what I did one day was I actually got him to host a session on talking about the LGBT community. And he heard people's real stories. And my God, he was so emotional at the end of it. He came to me and said, Inga, I get it. So somehow you've got to get these people to hear real stories. This might be by posting videos of role models, you know, from all sorts of walks of life and whatever backgrounds they are, because somehow it's that human side, I think, that's got to capture them, rather than just appealing to that business formal side of them, something that, you know, gets their heartstrings going.
There's a lovely message here for you, Kellie. This is from Julie, and Julie says, "What a wonderful person you are, Kellie. You are a real important part of the human race." That's lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
I love what you said about that. And this message, perhaps you can answer, Kellie. It says, "Microaggressions are often commonplace to the LGBTQ plus community, especially when people don't understand. Can you share a story of how you dealt with it, or how an ally has showed up for you?"
I think it's fear. It's understanding. If we don't understand something, we fear it. And I think it's more fear. We have to conquer that fear. We have to, you know, I had fear about coming out, and that's probably why I wasn't the nicest person, because I was hiding myself. But when you can lose that fear, you may still not understand it, but if you can lose that fear factor, it changes everything. You know, I've tried changing people's views in the boxing world. Some I have, some I haven't, and I don't try changing them by anything other than just being myself. You know, if people see that you're a happy person, you're a engaging human being, people will engage with you. And I agree with Dane again. When you do that, the story has to come from the heart. You know, I'm not the greatest public speaker, but what I do is, I'm very dyslexic, so I don't prepare any speeches, and I stand and speak from the heart. I speak about my journey, the ups, the downs from it, the great moments, and I feel that gets through to people. And I always believe I leave them speeches, and I believe I've changed one person's views. And if I can do that, that is so important. And it's just letting people see, no matter what your sexuality is, your gender, your religion, your colour of your skin, your nationality, we're all human beings, and we're all members of the same team. I wish we could get all the letters and just throw them all in the bin and have one letter, R, respect for everybody.
Kellie, thank you for that. It's interesting that you say that, and actually, Inga and Mohsin, you'll probably agree as well. From a real business point of view, baby steps are actually big steps when it comes to LGBT inclusion, because, you know, if you can, I think for the folks watching, I think what we can take away from this is that it's not about a blanket approach to LGBT stuff, and there's one size fits all, and therefore your network should be like this, and you should read from this book. It's about those small, meaningful, honest conversations that can make a huge difference across the entire workplace. I want to come to you, Mohsin, for this one. This one's from John. It said, "Really enjoyed the talks today. How do we handle conflict in the workplace between some religious beliefs versus raising awareness for LGBT plus the LGBT plus community? We have heard concerns about promoting pride, for example, as being LGBT plus is against the beliefs of some employees."
Well, that's a really complicated scenario. I guess my own view is that it's really important that everybody feels like they can respect, you know, this is something that Kellie said, you know, everybody can respect the movements, the steps that you're taking. So for example, if you do have a religious minority that might disagree with some of the pride stuff, I think, okay, what I'm going to do is, instead of preaching, I'm going to give you an example. I have some members of my family who find my sexuality hard. And then when I talk to them, what I say is, okay, well, do you think that it's right that we teach people about different faiths so that they have respect for different faiths? And do you think it's right that we teach people about different cultures and different ethnicities so that they can learn to respect difference? And they say yes. I was like, okay, well, it's exactly the same for LGBT people. You know, and you know, that's the message I would adopt, is one of understanding that if you have a very particular religious belief, that's fine. Like, nobody can tell you otherwise. But the same way that you would expect respect for your belief is the same way that we should be entitled to respect for our sexuality.
Thank you for that. Folks, we've got 3 minutes left. So less than a minute for each of you on this answer, please. And it's came in for somebody, and it's a really lovely way to wrap up our session, actually. So thank you to whoever sent this in. It says, one message you can share with leaders and employees for a more inclusive future. Inga, why don't you go first?
I would ask them to make sure they seek out somebody that they don't know very well, who's different to them, and have a conversation, a curious conversation. Because this is what I fear isn't happening in the world today. We're not seeking out conversations with people who are different and have different views. And that's very simple to do. You can do it virtually. You don't have to be in person. I would urge everyone to try and have a conversation with somebody different to them.
Kellie, let's come to you next.
I would say, you know, you don't judge a book by its cover. Get to know that person, get to understand that person. I know for people in my community, it's very hard for them to come out and work. You can't force them to come out. You must let them come out in their own. And when they do come out, just treat them as you treat them before. It's not rocket science, this. You know, it's all about each and every one of us trying to work together, trying to understand each other. And I go back to my favourite word about respecting each other. You know, very quickly, even today, I have learned so much listening to the two other speakers. It's been an education for me. So if I'm getting educated, we can all get educated, because I'm not the cleverest one in the world.
Thank you, Kellie. Mohsin, let's come to you quickly then before we...
Sure. I suppose what I would say is, as a lawyer, my bread and butter is logic and argument. But what I've realized is that in this really divided world in which we live, that isn't working. And I also think that there are parts of our employee groups that are tired of hearing about diversity. And so I think that the one message I would give to leaders and employees to make their workplace more inclusive in the future is to center it around storytelling. Because I think that stories are the most powerful tool to provoke empathy and foster a culture of understanding amongst different groups.
Thank you for that. And thank you to all of you for being so honest and for sharing your story today. Really, it's been a pleasure. Like Kellie said, it just hearing you all has just brought such a smile onto my face. Folks at home, if you've missed this, or if you want to share this with your wider team, please do that. It will be available for you to rewatch and share at any time. Please use this this hour to educate folks in your workplace. If you struggle with resource, it's there for you to use. Please use it. And thank you to Kellie Maloney, Dame Inga Beale and Mohsin Zaidi for their time today. I've been Dean McCullough, and a big happy Pride Month. One thing I want to leave you with before I go, if you can do anything this Pride Month, please go and either read an LGBT book, watch an LGBT program, listen to an LGBT podcast, and just educate yourself and perhaps those around you on just one thing this month, because it will make a difference. From all of the folk at Speakers Corner and from me, thank you, and a big happy Pride Month. See you soon.
Happy Pride.
Thank you.